If you've heard of the name Charles Spurgeon, he was a 19th century preacher in London, a very famous pastor, writer. He had a school for pastors. He was out preaching in the countryside one time, and he got back on the train to come back to London. And as he gets into the compartment, there's only one other person in the compartment with him, and he sets his stuff down, and he starts looking in his bags, and then he starts checking his pockets, and he looks in his pockets, and his person in the compartment with him said, have you lost anything? And Spurgeon said, yes, I've lost my train ticket, and I don't have any extra money with me. And then Spurgeon said, but I'm not all that troubled, for I have been on my master's business, and I'm quite sure all will be well. I've had so many interpositions of divine providence in small matters as well as great ones that I feel as if whatever happens to me, I am bound to fall on my feet. And the guy kind of just nodded. At that moment, the steward came in to check the tickets in the compartment, and steward opens up the door, looks in, and his traveling companion, Spurgeon's traveling companion, tipped his hat and said, that will be all, William. And the steward left. And Spurgeon goes, that's weird. He didn't even check my ticket. And the man in the compartment says, no, Mr. Spurgeon, he knew who he was. No, Mr. Spurgeon. It's not strange that the collector did not ask for your ticket. It's only another illustration of what you told me about the providence of God watching over you, even in small matters. I am the general manager of this railroad line, and it was no doubt divinely arranged that I should be your companion just when you could be of service of me. That is God providing for his people. We want to talk about the providence of God today, and we're going to look at it in the life of Paul. But the providence of God is wrapped up throughout the scriptures. In Proverbs 3, 5 through 8, it calls believers to trust God with their whole heart rather than their own understanding, promising that he will direct their paths. Matthew 6 instructs against anxiety, assuring that the Father knows what is needed and will provide when the believers prioritize his kingdom. God knows what we need. Today in the text, we're going to see 3 instances of God providing providential care for his people, in this case, Paul. 3 times we're going to see in the text today. So we're going to be in Acts chapter 22. Hopefully you're already there. We'll begin reading in verse number 17 when we get there. What we're going to see in the rest of this chapter 22 is this. God uses his word and his works to providentially care for his people in this life and even before their birth. And I want you to hold on to that one. Even before you and I were born into this world, God was providentially caring for us. You're going to see it in the life of Paul here. When I first became a Christian, I realized God is a creator. He runs this whole universe. He's a very busy God. He doesn't have time for me. He doesn't really care. I'm just not that important for him to care about until I began realizing what he said about believers and his providential care for them. I understood that he's never too busy to care for his people. He's always overseeing, and somehow we think that he's too busy to take care of me personally for some reason. So Paul brought his speech to a conclusion. If you remember correctly, he's in the temple. He's paying for the 4 men who had the Nazirite vows. He's paying their payment so they can conclude their vow. The Jewish people in the temple think that he brings a Gentile into the sanctuary area that's not allowed for the Gentiles. They get all mad and start beating on Paul. The tribune pulls him out and takes him back to the barracks. And just when they get on the steps of the barracks, we saw last week that he mentioned, can I talk to the people? And the tribune said, Claudius Lysias said, yeah, sure, go ahead, you can talk to them. And he begins his speech. He gives his testimony, how I was before Christ, how I encountered Christ, and what my life is after Christ. And then we've come to the end of that section. He's about ready to draw the speech to a conclusion. We see in verse number 17. Verse number 17. So he's given us some information now. When I returned to Jerusalem, after he became a Christian, he got saved on the road to Damascus. When I had returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw him saying to me, Jesus was saying to him, make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And I said, Lord, They themselves know that in one synagogue after another, I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. That's how I was in the past. And when the blood of Stephen, your witness, was being shed, I myself was standing by and approving and watching over the garments of those who killed him. They know how I was. They can see how I am now. They ought to certainly listen to me. And what does Jesus say? And he said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. So after encountering Christ on the road to Damascus, Paul returns to Jerusalem. It's recorded in Acts chapter 9. So look at Acts chapter 9. Somebody up on the screen. And when he had come to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples. Remember, he had murdered Christians. He bound them. He brought them. He would sign the death warrant. He was all in for killing Christians, okay? And when he came to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples. And they were all afraid of him. I get it. He's a spy. For they did not believe that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles and declared to them how on the road he had seen the Lord who spoke to him, and how at Damascus he had preached boldly in the name of Jesus. So he went in and out among them, which means he just had fellowship with the believers there at Jerusalem, preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. So while this was taking place, he's preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. There's a group of Hellenists, that's Greek-speaking Jews, that want to kill him. While he was in Jerusalem, some Hellenists were seeking to kill him. Maybe that's why God told him to leave Jerusalem. I'm not sure, but they wanted to kill him. How do you know? It's recorded back in Acts chapter 9, after what we just read. Acts chapter 9, verse 29. And he spoke and disputed against the Hellenists, the Greek-speaking Jews, but they were seeking to kill him. You know, it seems like from the very beginning, people were trying to kill Paul. Yet you notice he never gives up. He never gives up. It's hard. You read 2 Corinthians chapter 11, all the things he encountered for Christ, and he never gives up. They were seeking to kill him. And when the brothers learned this, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. So God directed Paul to leave Jerusalem. He used his word, said, leave Jerusalem. And then the believers carried him on. So we have divine initiative and human engagement in the divine initiative. So both of them are working together to get him out of the city. God providentially took care of Paul by directing him through his word to leave the city, protecting Paul's life and ensuring that his ministry can continue, because his ministry is not over. God's not finished with Paul. Buswell, Pratt, and Elwell talk about the presence of God. And here's some of the things the providence of God. Here's some things they talk about in the providence of God. They said, God's providence refers to his universal sovereign rule, encompassing far more than mere foresight. It is God's work of preserving his creation, a continuous activity rather than a one-time event. Three foundational principles anchor this doctrine. God holds complete control over all things, and nothing can stand against him or defeat his ultimate purposes. Since God created the world, it belongs to him and remains subject to his authority. God possesses an external plan for creation that explains its very existence. But it operates on multiple dimensions. Special providence refers to God's particular care over believers' lives and activities. God cares. He cares for us. Do you know this week he was caring for us? Last week he was caring for us. Next week he's going to care for us. The providential care of our God for us, he never leaves us or forsakes us. I know at times we feel that way, don't we? Oh, I'm all alone. You're never alone. God's providential care covers your life. We know Romans 8:28 affirms that circumstances work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Genesis 50 illustrates this principle through Joseph's experience. What others intended as harm, God redirected towards preserving life. Jeremiah 29 presents God as one who knows and directs plans towards welfare and hope. Proverbs 16:9 captures the dynamic between human intention and divine establishment. While people plan their path, the Lord directs their steps. God's providential care over us. When I was a junior in high school, it must have been in the springtime, because I wasn't a fresh on to junior. A junior in high school, I was coming home from an event. It was later. It wasn't super late. It wasn't after 12 o'clock. I was home for curfew, but it was later on. It had started raining. So I'm driving my car down a road, it's 45 miles an hour, and I'm coming to a corner. It's not a super tight corner. I probably could do 40 on the corner. It's not super tight. But as I approached the corner, a car from the opposite direction hit water on the road, splashed my windshield, and the windshield wipers are trying to clear the water off, but I can't see where I'm going. So I just grab a hold of the steering wheel like that. When it cleans it off, I'm heading straight for the ditch. I hit the ditch. Somehow I pop back out on the road and I'm going, yes, I made it. And the only thing I can think of is I slammed on my brakes because then I went like this and landed upside down in the field. I walked away from that with one little tiny scratch on my elbow as my knees landed on the top of the roof of my car because I was not wearing a seatbelt. God takes care of us. I wasn't a Christian at the time. I wasn't a believer. I hadn't been called into the ministry that I'm called to. God providentially takes care of his people. That was a dramatic event, but I can guarantee you that there are events in your life that you have seen that God providentially takes care of you. We traveled in 18 months raising money to go to Germany. We went to church raising money, and we drove in 18 months, 85,000 miles in 18 months. We drove all over the place, and we joked as we're driving, I wonder how busy God's been keeping us on the road all this time. How many angels got tired of having to protect us from going off the road? I mean, God is always taking care of his people, always. I could have died, but God said, no, you're not going to die. Paul could have died right here, but God says, no, you're not going to die. God is providentially taking care of his people. Until our ministry on earth is done, no fatal harm can come to us. That doesn't mean we won't suffer physically, but no one can kill us until God calls us home. Linda Clont said something years ago when she came and she's a missionary to Italy. She said, we are invincible until God calls us home. We may suffer physically, Paul did, but no one can take our life until God calls us home. Matthew 6 uses a natural imagery to demonstrate God's provision. He feeds birds and clothes grass and therefore will care for his people. Matthew 10 emphasizes detailed divine attention. Not a sparrow falls without the Father's knowledge, and even individual hairs are numbered. Philippians 4:19 promises that God supplies every need according to his riches in Christ Jesus. Psalm 104 portrays creation looking to God for food, which he provides when he opens up his hand. Do not ever be afraid of what man can do to you because your God is providing for you. And until it's time for us to go home, no one can fatally harm us. Psalm 56, in God, whose word I praise, in God I trust. That's the key. I trust him. I don't understand what I'm going through. It seems to be a difficult time. It's rough. I don't like this, but God is caring for me in the midst. I trust him that he knows what he's doing, that he has my best interests in mind. I trust him, and I should not be afraid. What fear? What can flesh do to me? Nothing. When Luke recorded this in Acts 9, he doesn't tell about the vision. He doesn't say anything about the vision in the temple. We don't hear anything about that. We learn it right now. He's praying in the temple when he sees this vision. He's kind of answering the Jews' question is, I mean, if you hate the temple so much by bringing a Gentile in here, why would you go pray in the temple? So it's kind of an answer to his question. Of course he loves the temple. That's why he was praying in it. Paul's vision of the Lord here that we see is very similar. It parallels Isaiah's vision in chapter 6. We call it Isaiah's calling. It's very similar. There's a little bit of difference, but it's very similar. In Isaiah 6, here's what happened. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon the throne. So he sees God. Paul saw Jesus on the road to Damascus, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. And then jump down to verse 8. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, here am I, send me. It's not a direct calling, but it's putting out there the need. And Isaiah responds back, I'll go. And he said, go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. So God appears to both of them. God calls both of them into ministry. God tells them that people are not going to accept their testimony. People are not going to accept what they have to say. Now, the only difference is Isaiah's told to stay in the city, Paul's told to leave the city. But there are some similarities, some parallels between those two things. Paul thought for sure they'll recognize the old me and see the new me, and they'll listen to me, but they don't. They don't care. That doesn't work. God says, no, go. If Paul had not mentioned going to the Gentiles, he would likely have been released. That's what made them mad. You're going to see it here in just a second. That mention of, go, I'm sending you to the Gentiles. That was it. Remember their Jewishness and the Jewish nationalism that's on the rise during this time period right now? Anything Gentile was suspicious. Anything Gentile was suspicious. However, he was a faithful witness. He spoke the truth even when it cost him something. It got him in trouble. That's a good advice for us. Just speak the truth. Let it stand where it is. It is the truth. Speak the truth. Even if you come in trouble for speaking the truth, speak the truth. Okay, so the mob hears something they're not willing to accept at all. Look at verse 22. So up to this word, they listened to him. In other words, everything he had to say, he's talking about how he was before Christ, how he encountered Christ, how he was after Christ. And so they're listening to him intently up until that word, Gentiles. Then they raised their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. They want him dead. And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust in the air, the tribune ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging. Okay, we'll get the answers out of him. We'll just beat him till we find the truth. To find out why they were shouting against him like this. Remember, the tribune probably doesn't understand Aramaic, so he doesn't know what they're talking about. Remember, he's speaking to them in Aramaic. He probably doesn't know what they're talking about. Okay, so examine him by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him like this. But when they had stretched him out for the whips, so he's bent over this wooden thing to be ready to be flogged, Paul said to the centurion, that's the leader over 100 men, who was standing by, is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned? That's the question. It's not arrogance. I don't hear any arrogance in that question. It's a very polite question to the leader there. It's a very polite question. So he says, is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen uncondemned? When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, what are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen. So the tribune came and said to him, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? And he said, yes. The tribune answered, I bought this citizenship for a large sum. Sometimes if you were a soldier, you would be granted citizenship after your duty. Sometimes you bought citizenship, especially this time about 50 AD, they were selling citizenships, okay? He bought it, but Paul was born a Roman citizen. So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately, and the tribune also was afraid, rightfully so, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him. You're not even allowed to bind Roman citizens that are uncondemned. So it's exactly what Jesus said that they would do. They do not like what he has to say. They do not like what he has to say. Remember, the Jews had no dealings with the Gentiles. In the Jewish mind, Gentiles were unclean. And if I even get in the presence of a Gentile, I'll be unclean. So for me to serve God better, I'm just going to ignore this vast amount of people who are Gentile. You know what a Gentile is? A non-Jew. So you got Jews and non-Jews. That's like the rest of the world, right? Jews and non-Jews. We're just going to ignore the rest of the world. They're not important to us. Just non-Jews. They had no dealing with the Gentiles. They're unclean. In fact, in Acts 10, we read this. And he said to them, you yourselves, Peter speaking, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. Well, why? Because they would get unclean and you couldn't worship God that way. They were looking at the Gentiles as unclean things. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So God shows them a difference. But in their mind, stay away from Gentiles. They're bad. They're bad. They're thinking that Paul is abandoning the law of Moses, going to the Gentiles, those Gentiles. William Baker says, in effect, Paul was saying that he could go to the Gentile world and offer salvation to them totally apart from Israel's institutions. that God could be approached apart from the law, the sacrifices, and the temple. This was to their minds the worst of apostasy. What? No, they have to become a Jew first before they can be a believer. They have to be circumcised first before they can become a believer. That's apostasy in their thinking, for they viewed the law as a way of salvation. Oh, you're abandoning the law, Paul. And even when Jesus is telling the parable of the banquet, he even talks about people rejecting. The offer goes out, but they're refusing it. That's what they're doing. They're refusing the offer that's given to them right now. This time of intense Jewish nationalism was raising its head, and the mention of Gentiles made Paul seem disloyal to his Jewishness. Well, I already told you how much he felt about the Jews. He said, I'm willing to go to hell if my Jews friends, brothers would get saved. That's how he feels about his people, but that's not what they're thinking. They're thinking he's disloyal to his Jewishness. John Stott said, in their eyes, proselytism, making Gentiles into Jews, was fine. But evangelism, making Gentiles into Christians without first making them Jews, was an abomination. It was tantamount to saying that Jews and Gentiles were equal. Hello. For they both needed to come to God through Christ, and that on identical terms. So they think it's an abomination and an apostasy to go talk to the Gentiles about God. Isn't that just sad when I say that out loud? God wanted all nations to hear about him. When he gave his revelation to Israel, it wasn't for them to keep, it was to spread to all the nations so all the nations could hear about him. To think that I don't want to take the gospel to somebody because they're not of my race or ethnicity, I don't understand that thinking. And the mob goes, we don't even want this guy alive. He doesn't have a right to exist. Let's kill him. We've heard that before in the past about Jews, haven't we? No right to exist. Look at the reaction in verse 23. Now the tribune steps in and saves Paul a second time. First time they pull him here, are beating him, pull him onto the steps. Now the second time they're wanting to kill him. He's going to pull him into the Antonio, what's it called? The Tower of Antonia. God providentially intervenes and spares Paul's life through the aid of a tribune, an unbeliever. Think about that. All things in creation bow to God's sovereign will, even unbelievers. And he can use unbelievers to providentially care for his people, which he's doing right here. The mob believed Paul was a blasphemer, and their reaction shows their horror. So they throw their cloaks in the air, or they take off their cloaks, they tore off their cloaks, and they throw dust in the air. And some have said they threw dust in the air because they couldn't find rocks to throw at him. That's possible. Could be that they threw off their cloaks so they could pick up rocks and throw at him and stone him for blasphemy and an abomination. But this rejection, we don't want anything to do with Christ or the gospel. This rejection, that generation now sealed their judgment. In less than 20 years, Jerusalem was going to be attacked and the temple destroyed within 20 years. They've sealed their judgment. Matthew 24, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, you see all these, don't you? Do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. They sealed their judgment by saying, we want nothing to do with this. And go to the Gentiles? What an abomination. So Claudius Lysistrus says, he can't understand what the crowd's saying. He doesn't know what's going on. He knows why they're so agitated. So he decides to use his own method to get to the truth. I'll beat the truth out of him. Now, I know sometimes we think that's a good option. I'll just beat the truth out of him. That's never a good option. Torture doesn't ever seem to work well. He's going to torture him. He's going to beat the truth out of him. John Polhill said, he decided to use the standard Roman method for getting the truth out of a slave or a common provincial, a form of examination under torture known by the Latin term flagellum. This was a particularly cruel manner of scourging that consisted of beating across the raw flesh with leather thongs in which were inserted rough pieces of bone or metal. The thongs were then set on a stout wooden handle. He's getting stretched out. He's about ready to get beat with this flagellum. And he goes, is it okay to beat a Roman citizen? I love the way he answers that. He doesn't demand his right. He says, is it okay to beat a Roman citizen uncondemned? And the centurion goes, whoa, no, man, you're not supposed to do that. No. And even sometimes after a flogging, people died. Or maimed for life. It was that serious. So Paul asked the centurion a question. He did not demand his rights. He said, hey, I'm a Roman citizen. Leave me alone. And he goes, no, hey, by the way, is it lawful to beat a Roman citizen uncondemned? Is it right? And the centurion knows the answer is no, not at all. So he's about to be flogged, but he calls on his Roman citizenship because it's against the law to flog a Roman citizen without being condemned. Paul was a citizen of heaven. He told us that in Philippians chapter 3, verse 20. He says, but our citizenship is in heaven. His citizenship is from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. He is a citizen of heaven, but he's also calling on his citizenship of the earth, his Roman citizenship. He's a dual citizen, if you want to think of it like that. It's kind of like us. If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, your citizenship is in heaven, but God has placed you providentially in America and made you a citizen of America. We have dual citizenship. And Paul used his earthly citizenship to help promote the preaching of God's word. He did not deny his citizenship, for God had providentially provided that citizenship for him. We have wonderful opportunities in America to proclaim the gospel message because of American system of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. We'll use our American citizenship properly so we can promote the gospel message. We don't deny our American citizenship. We understand that we're dual citizens. And you ask, well, how does one know that you're a Roman citizen? That is a really good question, and I don't have a particular answer yet for it. It's possible they carried a parchment saying they were a Roman citizen. I'm not sure. I have yet to find it. I can't seem to find it in the commentaries. I'm not sure. But I do know one thing. If you claim you're a Roman citizen and it was proven to be false, it was an automatic death sentence. Sustinius said this, he who falsely pretended to Roman citizenship was beheaded on the Esquiline Hill. So it's not something you play around with. He claimed his Roman citizenship. At Philippi, he did not, which is interesting. He was beaten at Philippi with rods, not flogging, but with rods. He didn't claim his citizenship at Philippi. Acts 16. Afterwards, he talks about being a citizen, not before the beating, but after. But Paul said to them, they have beaten us publicly, uncondemned men who are Roman citizens. He and Silas were Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And do they now throw us out secretly? No. Let them come themselves and take us out. So he only says after the fact that he was a Roman citizen. Here is before the beating. He says, I'm a Roman citizen. The Tribune says, I bought my citizenship. And Paul says, yeah, but I was born free. What does that mean? That means Paul's parents were Roman citizens. And perhaps his parents before them. And perhaps the parents before them. Somewhere down the line, someone in Paul's family became a Roman citizen. Maybe when Tarsus itself was granted Roman citizenship, or maybe somebody in the family did something for the emperor and was granted Roman citizenship. Once one of the members of the family has it, it passes on down to all the generations. Roman citizenship. Consider this. God had given Roman citizenship to Paul's parents before he was born. God provided for Paul even before his birth, before he even came into existence. He was already working his will in creation to bring about this place where Paul could have come as a Roman citizen and preached the gospel across the empire. As a Roman citizen, Paul had privileges that would aid him in proclaiming the gospel message throughout the empire. God made sure through his providence that Paul would be born a Roman citizen. God acted before he was even born. Through his providence, God has acted before you were born to place you at the right time, at the right place, and attached to the right people to further his purposes in this world. And you would say, you had me up to the last part, attached to the right people. You had me there, but there's some people in my life that I would not want to have been attached to because they were very harmful to me. Yet, God in his ultimate wisdom attached you to people who would help you become the person you are today, even all of the bad things that happened in your life. even if they were horrible people. God providentially cared for you and brought you to here, to this point. Like we say of Esther, for such a time as this. God has placed us here at this time for his purposes in the world. He has providentially brought us all together to work out his will in this world. Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. Can you say that? Can I say that? All things? I've had some pretty bad things happen in my life, you say. Some really horrible people have been part of my life. You're telling me that all of that works together for good? I don't get it. But the question is, do we trust him? He says it. Do we really trust him? All things work together for good for those who are called according to his purposes. Isaiah 46 declares that God announces the end from the beginning and accomplishes his entire purpose. Colossians 1 states that all things were created through Christ and for him, and he holds all things together. Hebrews 1:3 describes Christ as upholding the universe by the powerful word. Psalm 115 simply affirms that God does all that pleases him. He's a sovereign creator who cares for his people. He's not some despot over there not caring what you and I are going through at any point in our life. He is the good shepherd that goes out before us and calls his sheep by name and says, come follow me and I'll take you into the fields and we'll work together for the glory of the Father. Here's some things. First, trust God and know his word. He used his word to providentially care for Paul by telling him to leave Jerusalem so he's not killed. So trust his word. Know it. What has he said? Especially that one, I will never leave you or forsake you. What a verse to tattoo to your mind. Secondly, trust God's plan for his creation. He's got a plan. He's bringing all things to its end, to its purpose. He has a plan. God providentially cares for his people by exercising ultimate authority over his creation, ordering all things according to his sovereign will. All things according to his sovereign will. We can walk away with the assurance today that our God always cares for his people. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for showing us that not only by this unbelieving tribune you used to care for Paul, but that you used your word to care for him as well. That you provided instruction and insight and direction so that he could follow your word to carry out your purpose in his life, to providentially care for him. Thank you. Father, I am so very thankful that as our good shepherd, we can cry out like the Psalmist 23 says, I will want nothing. I lack nothing in my life. There is nothing that I lack. All things have been given to me for life and godliness, we are told in the scriptures, Father. I lack nothing. If you know when a sparrow falls to the ground and you know how many hairs are on my head, I can trust you that you have my best interests in mind. And I'll lean into you and I'll hold tight to you when my world seems to fall apart, when it seems like no one cares for me. I will always know that you care for me, Father. I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.